The fluorescent lights of Hangar 12 cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as Captain Maria Santos wiped her hands on an oil-stained rag. Her coveralls bore the name Martinez, stitched in faded red thread, a deliberate choice that matched the false identity she'd carefully constructed over the past 18 months. To everyone at Coastal Air Reserve Station, she was simply Maria Martinez, a civilian aircraft mechanic who kept to herself and did exceptional work on the aging fleet of rescue helicopters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hey Martinez, you done with that transmission yet? Called out Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison from across the hangar, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned her presence among the tools and aircraft parts. Colonel wants Bird 7 ready for tomorrow's training exercise. Maria looked up from the Sikorsky HH-60 Jayhawk she'd been working on, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail beneath a worn baseball cap. Streaks of hydraulic fluid marked her cheeks, and her fingernails carried the permanent stains of someone who'd spent years elbow-deep in aircraft engines. Give me 20 minutes, she replied, her voice carrying just enough of the accent she'd grown up with in East LA to maintain her cover. Just need to run the final diagnostics. The truth was, she'd finished the transmission repair an hour ago. The delay gave her time to observe the flight crews as they prepped for their missions, to study their procedures and protocols with the trained eye of someone who'd once commanded similar operations from the cockpit of far more advanced aircraft. But those days were buried beneath layers of carefully constructed deception, hidden behind the persona of a skilled but unremarkable mechanic who arrived early, worked late, and never volunteered information about her past. Morrison nodded and moved on to hassle another crew member about pre-flight checks. Maria returned to her work, though her attention was split between the aircraft's mechanical systems and the weather reports crackling over the hangar's radio. Hurricane Delilah was strengthening in the Gulf, currently a Category 3 but predicted to intensify rapidly as it approached the coast. The storm's projected path had shifted overnight, putting their station directly in the danger zone. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, hiding among the very people who might soon need the skills she'd spent a decade perfecting, the expertise that had earned her a reputation as one of the most capable pilots in the most elite aviation unit in the world. But that reputation belonged to someone else now, someone who'd officially died in a training accident over the Pacific 3 years ago, taking with her the weight of classified missions and the burden of decisions that had saved countless lives while haunting her dreams. The facade. Maria's transformation from Captain Santos to Maria Martinez had been deliberate and thorough. She'd studied the mannerisms of the mechanics she'd worked alongside during her military career, adopting their casual relationship with authority and their practical approach to problem-solving. She'd learned to speak differently, to carry herself with the confidence of someone who understood machines rather than the bearing of someone who'd commanded them in combat situations that most people couldn't imagine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in the coastal town of Corpus Christi, reflected her cover identity perfectly. Aviation magazines were scattered across her coffee table, but they focused on civilian aircraft and restoration projects rather than military specifications. Her bookshelf contained technical manuals for helicopter maintenance alongside popular fiction, the reading material of someone pursuing a civilian career in aviation rather than someone who'd once held top-secret clearance and piloted missions that would never appear in any official record. The most challenging aspect of her deception wasn't the technical knowledge. She'd always been hands-on with aircraft maintenance during her military service. It was the constant vigilance required to maintain the persona, to remember that Maria Martinez had learned her skills at a community college in San Antonio rather than through years of intensive military training. She had to resist the urge to correct tactical errors she observed during training exercises, to bite her tongue when she saw inefficiencies that her experience could easily resolve. Her social life was carefully curated to support her cover. She dated occasionally, always civilian men who knew nothing about aviation and cared even less about her work. She attended local events sporadically, just enough to avoid seeming antisocial while maintaining the privacy necessary for her deception. Her closest relationship was with Elena Vasquez, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door and had adopted Maria as a surrogate daughter, fussing over her long work hours and apparent lack of family connections, the weight of secrets. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness or the constant vigilance. It was watching good people struggle with situations she could easily resolve if she could reveal her true capabilities. 3 months ago, she'd stood in the hangar and watched a young pilot named Lieutenant Sarah Chen prepare for a complex rescue mission in deteriorating weather conditions. Chen was competent but inexperienced, and Maria could see the signs of Pre-flight anxiety that came with attempting a mission at the edge of one's skill level. Every instinct in Maria's body had screamed at her to intervene, to offer guidance or even to suggest mission modifications that would improve the chances of success. Instead, she'd maintained her cover, watching helplessly as Chen's aircraft disappeared into the storm clouds. The mission had been successful, but barely, and Maria had spent the following week replaying scenarios in her mind, calculating how she might have improved the outcome if she'd been able to act on her expertise. The incident had reinforced her understanding of the cost of her deception. She wasn't just hiding from her past, she was actively choosing to withhold capabilities that could save lives. The decision to maintain her cover had been made for sound reasons, security concerns that went far beyond her personal safety, but the weight of that choice grew heavier with each passing day. Her handler, a woman known only as Director Phillips, contacted her monthly through an encrypted communication system that appeared to be routine maintenance updates for industrial equipment. The messages were brief and professional, confirming that the security situation that had necessitated her disappearance remained unchanged. Maria was to maintain her cover indefinitely, avoiding any actions that might compromise her new identity or draw attention to her presence at the coastal facility. The storm approaches. The weather reports grew more ominous as the afternoon progressed. Hurricane Delilah had strengthened to a Category 4 storm with winds approaching 150 miles per hour, and its northeastward track now placed their coastline directly in the path of the storm's most dangerous quadrant. Emergency management officials were calling for evacuations along the coast, and the air station was implementing its severe weather protocols. Maria watched the organized chaos of storm preparation with professional interest. Aircraft were being secured or relocated to inland facilities, ground equipment was being moved to hardened shelters, and non-essential personnel were being evacuated. The process was efficient but not optimal, she noted, observing bottlenecks and resource allocation decisions that could be improved with better coordination. "Martinez, you're on the evacuation list," Morrison called out as he approached her workstation. "Civilian contractors are being moved inland until the storm passes. Bus leaves in an hour." Maria nodded, though every fiber of her being rebelled against the idea of leaving when her skills might be needed. "What about the aircraft?" "You've got 3 birds that aren't fully mission ready." "We'll manage," Morrison replied, but she could see the stress in his expression. The facility was short-staffed even under normal circumstances, and the storm preparations were stretching their resources thin. "Priority is getting people to safety." As Maria gathered her tools and prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a mistake. The meteorological data she'd been monitoring suggested that Delilah was developing characteristics that would make it an extremely dangerous storm, the kind that would demand every available resource and expertise to manage effectively. Her experience with extreme weather operations, gained through years of high-stakes missions in conditions that tested the limits of both aircraft and crew, might be exactly what would be needed in the coming hours, but Maria Martinez, civilian mechanic, had no standing to voice such concerns. She was expected to evacuate with the other non-essential personnel, to trust that the military professionals would handle whatever challenges the storm might bring. The fact that she possessed knowledge and skills that could prove crucial was irrelevant as long as she maintained her cover. The evacuation. The bus ride inland was subdued, filled with civilian contractors and support personnel who understood they were leaving behind colleagues who would face the storm's full fury. Maria sat near the back, her tool bag secured at her feet, listening to the quiet conversations around her. Most of the talk centered on the storm's intensity and the uncertainty of when they might be able to return to work. "Never seen anything like this," muttered Pete Rodriguez, a maintenance supervisor who'd worked at the station for 15 years. "Delilah's got that look about her, you know? Like she's personal." Maria understood what he meant. Some storms carried an almost malevolent presence, a sense of purposeful destruction that went beyond mere meteorological phenomena. She'd encountered such storms before, during missions that had tested her skills and judgment in ways that regular training never could. The memory of flying through the eye wall of Hurricane Katrina during a classified evacuation operation remained vivid in her mind, a reminder of nature's raw power and the thin line between survival and catastrophe. The evacuation center was a converted gymnasium in a small town 50 miles inland, equipped with cots, basic amenities, and emergency communications equipment. Maria claimed a corner spot and settled in to wait, though her mind remained focused on the approaching storm and the people she'd left behind. She'd activated her emergency communication device before leaving the base, a precaution that would allow her handler to locate her if the security situation changed. As evening fell, the first reports from the coast began filtering in. Delilah had strengthened to a Category 5 storm, with sustained winds of 165 miles per hour and a rapidly intensifying core. The Hurricane's eye was compact and well-defined, characteristics that indicated an extremely dangerous storm capable of catastrophic damage. More troubling were the reports of unexpected wind shear patterns that were affecting aircraft operations along the coast, creating conditions that would challenge even experienced pilots. The call to action at 2:30 a.m., Maria's encrypted communication device vibrated with an incoming message. The text was brief and urgent. Delilah critical. Authorization granted for emergency protocol. Acknowledge immediately. Maria stared at the message, her mind racing through the implications. Emergency protocol meant that the security concerns that had necessitated her cover were being overridden by more immediate priorities. She was being given permission to act, to use her skills if necessary to address whatever crisis was developing with the Hurricane. Her response was equally brief: acknowledged. Status ready. The reply came within minutes: Coast Guard reporting. Multiple aircraft in distress. Conditions beyond current crew capabilities. Your discretion authorized. Maria felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same rush she'd experienced before high-stakes missions during her military career. After 18 months of enforced passivity, she was being given the chance to use her skills where they were needed most. The decision of whether to reveal her capabilities was being left to her judgment. Based on the situation as it developed, she gathered her belongings and made her way to the evacuation center's communication station, where a volunteer was monitoring emergency frequencies. The reports coming in were increasingly dire. A Coast Guard helicopter had gone down in heavy seas, a civilian aircraft was missing in the storm's outer bands, and rescue operations were being hampered by conditions that were pushing aircraft and crews beyond their operational limits. I need to get back to the base, Maria told the volunteer, her voice carrying a new authority that made the young man look up sharply. Ma'am, the roads are closed. Nothing's moving until the storm passes. Maria studied the weather displays and communication equipment, her mind calculating risks and options. The storm's eye was still hours away, but the outer bands were already creating conditions that would challenge conventional rescue operations. If she was going to act, it would have to be soon, before the weather made any movement impossible. I know someone who might be able to help, she said, pulling out her phone to make a call that would begin the process of shedding her carefully constructed cover. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Elena? Mija, what are you doing calling at this hour? Elena, I need your help, Maria said, the endearment coming naturally despite the circumstances. And I need to tell you something important about who I really am. As she began to explain her situation to the elderly woman who'd become like family to her, Maria felt the weight of her deception beginning to lift. The time for hiding was over. Hurricane Delilah was about to test everyone's limits, and she could no longer afford to pretend to be someone she wasn't. The storm was coming, and with it, the chance to finally use the skills that had defined her life before she'd been forced to disappear. Whatever happened next, Maria Santos was about to reclaim her identity, one way or another. The return Elena Vasquez proved to be exactly the ally Maria needed. The elderly woman listened without judgment as Maria explained her true identity and the circumstances that had led to her cover at the air station. More importantly, Elena's late husband had been a career military man, and she understood the complexities of classified operations and the sacrifices they sometimes demanded. My Miguel always said the best soldiers were the ones who knew when to break the rules, Elena said, her weathered hands steady as she helped Maria prepare for the dangerous journey back to the coast. You do what you have to do, Mija. People are counting on you, even if they don't know it yet. Elena's nephew, Carlos, owned a heavy-duty pickup truck equipped for rough weather conditions. Despite the mandatory evacuation and road closures, he agreed to attempt the drive back to the coast, understanding that lives might depend on getting Maria back to the air station before the storm's full fury arrived. The drive was treacherous, with visibility near zero and wind gusts that threatened to push even the heavy truck off the road. They made the journey in tense silence, focusing on the hazardous conditions while Maria monitored radio reports from the base. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, with multiple aircraft now reported missing or in distress as the storm's outer bands created conditions that exceeded the capabilities of the available crews. As they approached the final checkpoint before the air station, Maria made a decision that would irrevocably change her carefully constructed life. She pulled out her military identification card, the one that officially belonged to a dead woman, and prepared to present it to the security personnel who would either accept her authority or arrest her for impersonating a federal officer. The young airman at the checkpoint took one look at the ID and reached for his radio, his training taking over as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. Within minutes, Maria found herself face-to-face with Colonel David Martinez, the base commander who'd been struggling to coordinate rescue operations in impossible conditions. Captain Santos, he said, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and disbelief. I was told you were dead. It's complicated, Maria replied, her cover identity finally falling away after 18 months of careful maintenance. But right now, people are dying out there, and I can help. As she spoke, the full weight of Hurricane Delilah continued to bear down on the coast, bringing with it the test that would determine whether her skills were truly as exceptional as her reputation suggested. The storm was about to demand everything she had learned, everything she had trained for, and everything she had hidden during her time as Maria Martinez. The deception was over. The real test was about to begin. Colonel Martinez stared at the military ID card in his hands, his expression cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally, grim acceptance. The fluorescent lights in the base operations center flickered as Hurricane Delilah's outer bands hammered the facility with increasing intensity, and the radio chatter filling the room painted a picture of escalating crisis. Your file says you died in a training accident over the Pacific, he said, his voice barely audible above the storm's roar and the urgent communications from rescue teams. There was a memorial service. I attended it myself. Maria stood at attention, her oil-stained coveralls a stark contrast to the military bearing she now displayed without reservation. The accident was staged, sir. I was reassigned to a classified program that required my official death. The details are above my clearance level to discuss. Jesus Christ, Martinez muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. 3 years. You've been here 18 months under my command, and I never— That was the point, sir, Maria interrupted, her tone respectful but urgent. But the situation has changed. I have authorization to reveal my identity and assist with current operations if my skills are needed. As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled with a desperate transmission. Mayday, Mayday, this is Coast Guard 6024. We have engine failure and are attempting emergency landing in 40-foot seas. Request immediate assistance. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the young pilot Maria had watched with concern months earlier, was manning the communications station. Her face was pale as she responded to the distress call, her voice professional despite the obvious stress. Coast Guard 6024, this is Corpus Christi Rescue. We're tracking your position, but weather conditions are beyond our operational limits for rescue aircraft. Maria stepped forward, her mechanics facade completely abandoned. Colonel, with your permission, I'd like to review the current situation and available resources. Martinez hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Chen, brief Captain Santos. On all active incidents. The young lieutenant's eyes widened as she processed the rank and implications, but her professionalism took over. Yes, sir. We have 3 aircraft in distress, Coast Guard 6024 with engine failure attempting water landing, civilian Cessna 172 missing in the storm's outer bands with 4 souls on board, and Coast Guard 6031 that went down 2 hours ago with a crew of 5. Search and rescue efforts are suspended due to weather conditions exceeding all safety protocols. Maria studied the radar displays and weather data, her mind automatically calculating flight paths, fuel consumption, and risk factors with the precision of someone who'd spent years making similar assessments under extreme conditions. The storm's structure was more complex than the briefings had indicated, with multiple embedded supercells and wind shear patterns that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. What aircraft do we have mission ready? She asked, her attention focused on the tactical situation rather than the stunned faces around her. 2 HH-60 Jayhawks, Chen replied, consulting her status board. But sir, the conditions are— I know what the conditions are, Maria said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd faced similar situations before. I also know that we have people dying out there while we debate operational limits. The test of credibility. Colonel Martinez studied Maria with the calculating gaze of a commander weighing an extraordinary decision. Captain Santos, assuming your identity is legitimate and your skills are as advertised, what would you recommend? Maria moved to the large tactical display that dominated the operations center, pointing to the storm's structure with the confidence of someone who'd studied similar patterns in combat conditions. The storm has 3 distinct wind zones. The northern quadrant has embedded supercells that are creating localized wind shear, but there's a corridor here, she traced a path with her finger, where the wind patterns are more predictable. A skilled pilot could use that corridor to reach the first 2 aircraft. The Coast Guard crew that went down 2 hours ago? Martinez asked. More challenging, Maria admitted. They're in the storm's most dangerous quadrant, where the winds are approaching 180 miles per hour and the wave heights are beyond measurement. That would require flying through the eye wall itself. The room fell silent except for the storm's constant roar and the crackling radio communications. What Maria was suggesting was far beyond the capabilities of any pilot currently available, a fact that everyone in the room understood without needing to voice it. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior enlisted man who'd worked with Maria for months without knowing her true identity, stepped forward. Martinez, Captain, I've watched you work on those birds for over a year. You know those aircraft better than anyone here. But knowing machines and flying them in conditions like this are two different things, Maria finished. You're right to be skeptical. But I've flown in conditions like this before, and I've studied these aircraft extensively. The question isn't whether I can do it, it's whether we can afford not to try. Lieutenant Chen looked up from her communications station, her face reflecting the weight of the decision before them. Sir, Coast Guard 6024 is reporting they have maybe 10 minutes before they're forced to ditch. If we're going to act, it has to be now. Martinez made the decision that would define the next several hours. Captain Santos, you're authorized to attempt rescue operations. Chen, you'll serve as her co-pilot and communications officer. Sir, Chen protested, I've never flown in conditions approaching these parameters. Neither have I, Martinez replied grimly. But Captain Santos apparently has, and she's the only chance those people have. Preparation under pressure. The next 15 minutes were a blur of activity as Maria prepared for a mission that would test every skill she'd developed during her years of classified operations. The aircraft she'd maintained as a mechanic was about to become her lifeline, and the irony wasn't lost on her as she conducted the most thorough pre-flight inspection of her career. Bird 7 is your best option, she told Chen as they suited up in survival gear. I rebuilt that transmission myself 3 months ago, and the engines were overhauled last week. She'll handle the stress better than the others. Chen nodded, though her nervousness was evident. Captain, I have to ask, what kind of conditions have you flown in before? Because what we're about to attempt is insane by any reasonable standard, Maria finished. But I've flown through the eye walls of Category 5 hurricanes, extracted personnel from combat zones during typhoons, and conducted night operations in weather that wasn't supposed to exist. The key is understanding that the aircraft is more capable than the conditions suggest, if you know how to use it properly. As they approached the Jayhawk, Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had always preceded her most challenging missions. The aircraft looked different now, not just a machine she maintained, but a precision instrument she would use to save lives. The transition from mechanic to pilot was complete in her mind, even if the physical transformation had taken only minutes. One thing, she said to Chen as they completed their pre-flight checks. Everything I'm about to do is going to seem wrong by the book. Trust me anyway. Yes, ma'am, Chen replied, though her uncertainty was clear. The hangar doors opened, revealing the full fury of Hurricane Delilah's approach. Wind gusts of over 100 miles per hour were already buffeting the facility, and the rain was coming in horizontal sheets that made visibility nearly impossible. Under normal circumstances, no aircraft would attempt to operate in such conditions, but these weren't normal circumstances, and Maria Santos wasn't a normal pilot. First contact with the storm. The takeoff was unlike anything Chen had experienced, requiring techniques that seemed to defy conventional training. Maria used the aircraft's power and the storm's wind patterns to achieve lift under conditions that should have been impossible, her touch on the controls reflecting years of experience in extreme weather operations. How are you doing that? Chen asked over the intercom, her voice tight with controlled fear as they climbed through the storm's outer bands. The storm wants to push us around, Maria replied, her concentration absolute as she navigated through wind shear that would have torn apart a less expertly flown aircraft. But if you understand its patterns, you can use that energy instead of fighting it. The radar display showed the full scope of the challenge ahead. Coast Guard 6024 was 47 miles offshore, struggling to maintain altitude in conditions that were rapidly deteriorating. The civilian aircraft was somewhere in the storm's chaotic outer bands, its last known position 23 miles to the northeast. Priority target is the Coast Guard crew, Maria announced, banking the aircraft into a turn that seemed impossible. Given the wind conditions, they have the most immediate need and the best chance of survival if we can reach them. Chen monitored the communications and navigation systems, her respect for Maria's abilities growing with each passing minute. The aircraft was responding to conditions that should have been unmanageable, guided by a pilot who seemed to anticipate the storm's behavior with uncanny accuracy. Contact! Chen called out, her voice sharp with excitement. Coast Guard 6024, bearing 270, distance 12 miles. Through the storm's chaos, they could see the struggling aircraft, its pilot fighting a losing battle against mechanical failure and impossible weather conditions. The rescue would require a precision approach that would test the limits of both aircraft and crew. The first rescue what followed was a demonstration of flying skill that would have been remarkable under any conditions, but in the midst of a Category 5 hurricane, it bordered on the impossible. Maria positioned their aircraft with mathematical precision, using the storm's wind patterns to create a pocket of relative stability where the rescue could be attempted. "This is going to be close," she warned Chen as they approached the disabled Coast Guard helicopter. "I need you to coordinate with their crew for personnel transfer. We'll have maybe 3 minutes before the conditions shift." The rescue basket operation required split-second timing and absolute trust between crew members. Chen directed the transfer with growing confidence, her communication skills proving invaluable as she coordinated between the two aircraft while Maria held their position against winds that were approaching 150 miles per hour. "Last man coming up," Chen announced as the final crew member was pulled to safety. "We're clear to depart." Maria didn't wait for confirmation, immediately banking away from the disabled aircraft as a sudden wind shear threatened to push them together. The rescued crew members were secured in the passenger compartment, their relief evident despite the continued danger of their situation. "One down," Maria said, her voice steady despite the intensity of the operation. "Now for the civilian aircraft." But as they turned toward the storm's outer bands, the weather conditions began to deteriorate even further. Hurricane Delilah was intensifying beyond all predictions, and the corridor Maria had identified was rapidly closing as the storm's structure evolved. The impossible decision. 20 minutes into their search for the civilian aircraft, it became clear that the conditions were approaching the limits of what even Maria's skills could overcome. The storm's wind shear was creating downdrafts that threatened to slam them into the ocean, and the visibility was dropping to near zero. "I'm not getting any response from the Cessna," Chen reported, her voice tight with frustration. "Last GPS ping was 30 minutes ago." Maria studied the radar display, her mind calculating probabilities and risks with the cold precision of someone who'd made similar decisions in combat. The civilian aircraft was almost certainly down, its crew likely beyond rescue. Meanwhile, the 3rd Coast Guard helicopter remained in the storm's most dangerous quadrant, its crew's fate unknown. "We have a choice," she said, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. "We can continue searching for the civilian aircraft, or we can attempt to reach the Coast Guard crew that went down 2 hours ago." Chen understood the implications immediately. The Coast Guard crew is in the eye wall. No one has ever successfully flown through a Category 5 eye wall and survived. "No one you know about," Maria corrected. "But it's been done. The question is whether the potential rescue justifies the risk to our own crew and the people we've already saved." The decision would define not only the rest of the mission, but Maria's return to the world of high-stakes aviation operations. After 18 months of hiding her capabilities, she was facing the kind of choice that had once defined her military career, whether to attempt the impossible in service of saving lives. The storm's heart as Hurricane Delilah continued to intensify. Its eye wall began to take on the characteristics that made it one of the most dangerous natural phenomena on Earth. Winds exceeding 180 miles per hour created a vertical wall of destruction that extended from the ocean surface to heights of over 50,000 feet. The physics of flight became uncertain within such conditions, with aircraft subject to forces that could literally tear them apart. "Base, this is Rescue 7, Chen transmitted, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "We have successfully recovered Coast Guard 6024's crew and are evaluating options for remaining rescue operations." The response from Colonel Martinez was immediate. "Rescue 7, you are authorized to return to base. Weather conditions are beyond safe operational parameters." Maria listened to the exchange while studying the storm's structure on their weather radar. The eye wall was clearly defined, a perfect circle of destruction with a calm center that promised temporary respite for any aircraft that could somehow survive the passage through the surrounding chaos. "Chen," she said quietly, "I'm going to ask you to trust me one more time. We're going after that Coast Guard crew." The young lieutenant looked at her with a mixture of admiration and terror. "Captain, what you're suggesting, it's suicide." "Maybe," Maria agreed. "But 5 people are counting on us, and I have information that suggests it might be possible." As she spoke, Maria was already altering their course toward the storms committing them to an attempt that would either prove her exceptional skills or end in catastrophe. The storm's heart was calling, and after 18 months of hiding, Maria Santos was finally ready to answer. The next phase of their mission would take them into conditions that existed at the very edge of human capability, where the line between heroism and recklessness became impossible to define. But somewhere in the storm's most dangerous quadrant, 5 people were waiting for a rescue that conventional wisdom said was impossible. Maria Santos had never been particularly concerned with conventional wisdom. The transition into Hurricane Delilah's eye wall was like entering another dimension. Maria felt the aircraft buck and shudder as they penetrated the outer edge of the storm's most violent region, where winds exceeding 180 miles per hour created a vertical column of pure destruction. "Hold on," she called to Chen and the rescued crew members, her hands dancing across the controls with practiced precision. This is where it gets interesting. The Jayhawk was built for punishment, but nothing in its design specifications had anticipated the forces now trying to tear it apart. Maria used techniques she'd learned during classified operations in the Pacific, flying not against the storm but with it, using the eyewall's own energy to maintain control. Jesus, Chen breathed, watching the altitude readings fluctuate wildly as downdrafts threatened to slam them into the ocean before updrafts launched them skyward again. How are we still flying? Physics, Maria replied, her voice unnaturally calm as she navigated through conditions that defied rational explanation. The storm has patterns. You just have to see them. The calm center. 15 minutes later, they broke through into the eye itself, a circular cathedral of calm 30 miles across, with towering walls of cloud and lightning rising around them like the inside of a vast cylinder. The sudden cessation of wind and turbulence was so abrupt that Chen gasped audibly. There, Maria pointed to a spot on the ocean surface where she'd spotted debris. Coast Guard 6031. The helicopter floated partially submerged, its crew visible on the aircraft's hull, waving frantically at their approach. The rescue operation in the eye's comm center was almost routine compared to what they'd just endured, but Maria knew they had perhaps 20 minutes before the eye wall would shift and trap them in the storm's heart. All 5 crew members recovered, Chen reported as they secured the survivors. But Captain, how do we get out? The eye wall is closing in. Maria studied the storm's movement on their radar, calculating timing and trajectories with the precision of someone who'd spent years making such decisions under extreme pressure. We ride it out. The eye wall will weaken slightly as the storm makes landfall. We follow it to shore. The revelation what followed was the most technically challenging flight of Maria's career. She piloted the overloaded aircraft through the eye wall's weakening sections, using the storm's own energy patterns to navigate toward the coast. The technique required split-second timing and an understanding of hurricane dynamics that went far beyond normal pilot training. Base, this is Rescue 7, Chen transmitted as they finally cleared the storm's outer bands. We have recovered all 9 survivors and are returning to base. The response was immediate and incredulous. Rescue 7, confirm you successfully penetrated the eye wall of a Category 5 hurricane and recovered the 6031 crew. Confirmed, Maria replied, taking the radio herself. This is Captain Santos. All personnel are safe and accounted for. The aftermath of the landing at Corpus Christi was surreal. Ground crews and medical personnel rushed to assist the survivors, while Colonel Martinez waited on the tarmac with an expression of profound disbelief. 9 people, he said as Maria shut down the engines. You brought back 9 people from conditions that should have killed everyone involved. Maria climbed out of the aircraft, her coveralls once again oil-stained but now bearing the marks of the most extraordinary rescue operation in Coast Guard history. That's what we do, sir. We bring people home. Lieutenant Chen approached, her face reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and awe. Captain, what happens now? I mean, with your cover blown. Maria looked around at the faces of people who'd known her as a mechanic for 18 months, now seeing her as someone entirely different. The weight of her deception was lifting, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, the satisfaction of using her skills for their intended purpose. Now we deal with the paperwork, she said with a slight smile. And I suspect I'll be having some very interesting conversations with people in Washington. Epilogue. 6 months later, Captain Maria Santos stood in the same hangar where she'd once hidden behind the identity of Maria Martinez, but now she wore the uniform of the newly created Hurricane Rescue Squadron, a specialized unit formed in response to the increasing intensity of Atlantic storms. Lieutenant Chen, now her official co-pilot, approached with a mission briefing. Category 4 developing in the Gulf, Captain. Looks like we might have another interesting day. Maria studied the weather reports with the same analytical precision she'd once applied to aircraft maintenance, but now her focus was on flight patterns and rescue possibilities rather than mechanical systems. Prep Bird 7, she ordered, then paused. And Chen? Thanks for trusting me that day. Thank you for being worth trusting, Chen replied. As they prepared for another mission into conditions that conventional wisdom deemed impossible, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from hiding in plain sight to leading operations that saved lives in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The storm was calling again, and this time, she was ready to answer as exactly who she was meant to be. The END, up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.